Rain came in veils so fine they seemed spun from memory, drifting across the red and tumbling forks and washing the banners above the battlements until colors bled into one another. Catelyn stood under the torches, watching the curtain of water stitch the rivers into a single dark sheet, and thought how quickly news could drown a woman. Bran and Rickon, they told her, and the words had felt like stones tied to her bones, dragging her down to the riverbed with the silt and drowned roots. She had dreamt of her boys every night since she was a girl herself, a mother even before she knew it, and in those dreams Bran always climbed, laughing, and Rickon hid behind pillars with his tiny hands over his face, peeking through his fingers. The morning she heard, the walls of Riverrun seemed taller, the river lower, everything stretched between what had been promised and what had come. The torches hissed as the rain found them. Behind Catelyn, the corridor to the undercells breathed damp and stone. She had not seen him since the first day they dragged him from the Whispering Wood and put him in irons. Her wrists remembered the weight of the sword she had once asked for, the edge she had almost pressed to his throat. Almost. Honor had stayed her hand, honor and the sharp, relentless voice that had always been her father's. We are Tullis, and we keep our words. She had thought then that mercy, too, had a breadth and shape, and one day perhaps they would measure her and find her wide enough. Tonight there was no width to her, only length. Corridors narrowing, choices narrowing, the river's course narrowing between muddy banks. The cell was as she remembered, low-ceilinged, wet, the smell of men and metal. Jaime Lannister was a smear of pale gold in the torchlight. Chains patterned his wrists like bracelets from a vindictive jeweler. He had not shaved. Without polish and sun he seemed thinner, his beauty worn at the edges the way coins lose their faces with passing hands. "Lady Stark," he said, and the smile came quick, unspooling by habit. "Has your boy king grown weary of his prize? Tell him I am worth less by the day. Even gold tarnishes in such weather." Catelyn held the torch until the heat crawled through the iron into her palm. "They told me you killed my son. They tell you so many things," Jaime said. A drip fell from the arch and struck his shoulder. He did not flinch. "You have 2 sons, last I counted. Unless your rabbits multiply and we are mistaken. That's what this is." The words wanted to make ruin of her. She let them strike and run off. "You crippled one," she said, and if her voice broke she did not let it show. "You left my boy broken in his bed for a crime you did not know he witnessed. The other, people say he is dead. People say wolves and boys can be traded for ashes and bone. I find I have a poor ear this year for what people say. My Lord Father can bring one back," he said, soft, as if in jest, but the hunt in his eyes went still. "It only takes a king's head and a bishop's ring. Though you Starks put stock in the old gods, don't you? They return no one. Say what you like of gods. In the end it was not a god that had set a boy to fall, or a god who had called a man Kingslayer. You are here, sire. Men bled for it. You speak of weight, but your weight is ours to use. The weight of a Lannister is always used. We are counterweights for everyone's scales." He tugged his shackled hands. Metal rasped. "Enough shadows. I don't care for them in company. Why have you come?" "To free you," she had almost said 2 nights ago. "To trade you for my girls, to trade you for time, for the chance to pull my sons back across the threshold of the world." The thought had been a fever, and in it she saw Brienne's broad hands on the boat's oars, the river's thin silver in the moonlight, a path no man would anticipate. But that was a path chosen and then unchosen, a branch broken before the foot pressed down. "I came to tell you that you will not leave these walls until I have my daughters. Not before, not by night, not with a blade at my throat or your word in my ear." He blinked. It was only a flicker, but it rippled through her like a reed bending to a wind too cold for this month. "That is not what you wanted to tell me. My wants have become bones," she said. "Hard, bitter, useful only to those who gnaw them." She stepped closer. "Swear to me on whatever you hold dear that you did not kill Bran and Rickon." He looked up, and in the wet stone his own face peered back at him, smeared and lengthened. "On what I hold dear?" The laugh he made was not terrible, merely small. "On my sword? On the honor you say I never had? On my sister? On. I will hear no blasphemy. Blasphemy is the province of the faithful, he said. Rain struck somewhere and flowed along the corridor like the drawl of heavy silk. Very well then, I swear by my... And here we have the problem, my lady. I used to hold myself dear. I am less certain today, but I swear by the boy you say I crippled, if you like. I did not kill your sons. She watched him in the sound of water, and thought how oaths could carve men hollow or fill them to the brim. If you lie, she said, the river will know. The river is full of liars, he said, but he lowered his gaze as if a current had touched his ankle. Tell your son king that if he wants a head to mount upon a gate, mine will serve. But if he wants to end a war, perhaps he should start counting what I am worth breathing. I have counted, she said, and blew out the torch. Word of her visit bled quick as the banners. Robb came to her chambers the next morning, his face older than the beard could make it. She had not slept. The map was open, a quilt of parchment and wine-stained corners, little iron wolves for keeps and holds. It made her think of her mother, who used to mend clothing by a hearth that smoked, stitching pieces of children into something whole. Oh, you went to him, Robb said. Uncle Brynden told me. I go where I must, she said. When you were a boy, you would open doors just to see what was behind them. There are doors in Riverrun that no one opens anymore. The hinges rust shut. I had thought you meant to open this door by other means. He meant Brienne, loyal as bone, the boat, moonlight. A plan whispered after midnight when grief made brave fools of the sound-minded. Robb had looked at her then with a son's face, not a king's, and said he would not give one mother's love to the Lannisters to buy another's mercy. I did, she said to Robb now, and let the word be a stone in her mouth. I thought the river might carry him and buy our girls, but we are not river folk only. We are Tully and Stark. We are duty. Duty, he echoed, as if tasting something brackish. He leaned over the map and set a finger upon the twins. Lord Walder has sent to say he will excuse what is past if we come ask it beneath his beams. He wants a wedding for Edmure. She looked at her brother's iron wolf. He wants hostages. He wants your apology he can rap in song and feed his pride. He wants what everyone wants, Robb said. If I bring him his bridge, he will give me his men. And then, she asked, do wolves forget butchers' edges because men smile and pass wine? He drew his hand back. I have to make corrections. Lord Karstark demands Jaime's head. He sent 2 of his men 2 nights past. Brienne found them with a file and a mallet. They killed a guard. Catelyn felt her heart strike her breastbone like a hammer from inside. Is Brienne hurt? Not hurt, Robb said, and pride warmed his voice. A winter sun between snow clouds. She was iron. She laid both out on the cell floor and stood between. The Kingslayer tried them with jests even then, told one he swung that mallet like a groom at his first harvest. I think she grinned at him. She is odd like that. She makes no sense and so is true. She saw Brienne as clearly as if the girl loomed in the room. Wet hair plastered to the big brow, blue eyes like new ice, a sword in both hands because one would not be enough to catch night's work. Lord Karstark sent them. He admits it. He says that if I will not give him justice, he will take it. He wants my crown vowed to vengeance. I told him we are kings for more than a single father's hurt. He told me he would not call me king if I choose a Lannister over his sons. Mother, I cannot have my men stabbing through the night. The Karstarks are half my heart. Half my heart is drowned, she thought. You are not choosing him over his sons. You are choosing us all. He will see it in the morning when rain is gone and men remember bread. Her father had said once that vengeance was a meal that ended with hunger. She wondered if Lord Karstark had eaten at many tables. It was a war dawn, colorless, rain washing the sky clean. The men assembled in the yard, hoofs churning the mud, lines of watchers on the walls. You could tell the Karstarks by the bearskins and brooches and the thick beards like bracken. Lord Karstark stood with his chin lifted and his eyes hollowed by sleep lost and suns gone. Catelyn watched from above because kings must be watched when they raise swords against their own men. Robb spoke to the man for a long time in a low voice before the men were brought forward. The two would-be murderers kept their eyes on the ground as if the mud might open to save them. On one of the men's collars a shred of blue cloth clung, threadbare as promise. Jaime had such blue upon his wrist, she remembered. A scrap Brienne had tied there to keep the skin from chafing. Yoke and mercy, thread and iron. Robb's voice rose, and the words of treason and murder hung like pennants flat in the damp air. The sword fell when it must. Lord Karstark did not kneel then. But when Robb turned to him and spoke of orders given against the king's command, the man's defiance foamed up and broke. He said things a father says when drowning. He called Robb boy and knave and an oathbreaker for not choosing his pain as the first of all pains. Then he pulled free of his men in a burst and went for the yard where the cells lay. It had the raw, mad look of an animal running under moonlight when the dogs bay. Men held him. Robb's face had broken in half when he swung the second time that day. By sundown the Karstarks were gone. Banners lowered. Tents struck. No one sang. The entire camp felt like a chest after a cough that tears something in it. Functioned still, but differently. Brienne came to Catelyn in the twilight with rain beaded on her eyelashes. "My lady," she said. Her oaths were always newer than the day. She spoke them like wells speak water. "If you wish me to sit before the cell again, I shall. I'll stand until my feet put roots into your floors." "Stand," Catelyn said, touching her arm. "But do not take root. The earth demands too much to make a tree of you. Sit if you need. Sleep if human. He will taunt you to waste you, but you cannot be wasted. I will not have it." "He called me the tall girl," Brienne said, then smiled a little, as if being tall were a sin. "He speaks as if sin were a garment he could take off and hand to any who fit it." Catelyn found she could laugh even now, because Brienne had a gift for dragging ghosts into the light so they could be tripped over and thereby less frightening. "Then make a dress of iron," she said. "Wear it until it is your skin." In the nights that followed, the camp shifted into its new shape. The Karstarks left a gap like missing teeth. Food felt different between the jaws. Scouts came and went, messages like birds with little need to rest, and all of them seemed to circle the twins. Lord Walder's ravens multiplied. He named his terms with ardor and offense mixed. He asked for the apology public and complete. He asked for Edmure's wedding to be made a pageant of contrition. He asked for music. He asked for not hing of what a woman would ask, which is for time and patience and a little mercy if there is some left over after the men have taken theirs. Robb marched when he must. He left behind the Blackfish with such men as could be spared, and with them a Lannister knight bound in chains in the deepest cell, a treasure no man admitted to valuing in the open air. "You should bring him," Edmure had said in council, blushing when his sister's eyes found him. "If Lord Walder means to be difficult, no man is soothed quicker than with a hostage to his advantage. He makes traffic of grievance like some men do of grain." Catelyn had shaken her head. No, the word had weight. She felt it shake the beams above her. "We do not carry our peril into another man's hall, and we do not parade a prisoner we cannot afford to lose. If Lord Walder has any honor left to him, let him prove it without needing a sword at someone's ribs to remind him." Edmure had given her a long, wounded look and then agreed aloud, because that is what men often do when their pride sits between sister and lordship. The Blackfish said nothing until private, then only, "You will leave me with a Lannister wolf in my coops and a Frey tide at my gates. I can hold, but men have been undone by stranger balances. We cannot do everything," she said, "but we must do the things we choose as if they will hold the world." He kissed her brow as if she were the little girl who once ran after him in a too-short dress. "You speak as if you were meant to be queen." "I was meant to be wife," she said. He squinted at her. "The two are not so different only if you are very fortunate." Riverrun turned watchful as a cat by the hearth. The Freys hung banners and built fires along the long stretch of the twins. Boats came and went. Men in salt-stiff cloaks marched and unrolled carpets and tackcloth, bringing gaiety that had the smell of river rot to it. A wedding by the rivers meant wine and song in the riverlands meant a beat like a hand slapped to a tabletop, and there were always beans to be counted. The blackfish hummed under his breath and walked the parapets and ran his eye along the men as if he might pluck out their weak threads and repair them by hand. The Lannister prisoner whispered in the evenings to anyone who would come lend their ear. Guards with sadness in their shoulders, a lad with a pockmark that made his left eye seem always skeptical, even the maester when he came with broth. He had the gift for tying knots in men's thoughts and then offering to untie them with his smile. "Tell me a thing," Jaime said one night when Brienne alone brought him food. "Has your lady decided yet which boy she prefers dead?" Brienne set the bowl down so carefully the spoon did not even clink. "You think a joke will wear a woman's grief to fit you. I think grief is a cloak men try to wear as armor," he replied. "Heavy, always too hot, keeps no blade out." He tilted his head. "Truth told, I spoke to your lady in the dark once, and she seemed the sort who will swallow her own sorrow just to spite it." "She is more than that," Brienne said. "But I cannot teach you its language if your ear is stopped up with yourself. It's not selfish to admire the only clever, handsome man in the room," he said, and when she didn't dignify it with a scowl, he added low, "When my father breaks your lines, if he chooses to crack this river castle like an egg, he may get less yolk than he expects. I think sometimes I could like your blackfish, if I were not bound to turn knives in his belly." "Then tell me a thing," she said, surprising herself. "Did you push a boy from a tower?" His gaze marked her. She felt it like a brush of a wing. "I did what I did. I'll carry it until I can't." "When will that be?" "When the songs end," he said. "Or they become newer." He leaned back until the chain pulled hard. "Go on, tall girl. Say what you mean. My lady will not move you, but she will move. She's a river. You are a stone. Stones don't swim. They break a current's back for a while and then the current carries them anyway." "Then I should have been born water," he said. "And all this would be easier." The carts left and the horses followed, crossing at Lord Walder's command under pavilions hung with banners, the phrase twin towers smiling on their own reflection. Catelyn rode near Robb and held her hood against the mist. Men shouted and laughed and ate on the road because a wedding takes appetite with it. Bannermen traded japes as if they were coin, wagers on what color Roslin's hair would be, whether Lord Walder would insist on tasting the bride before the bedding, who would sneak into whose tent like a squire after cider. Boys make boys jokes to keep from thinking of knives. Every mile toward the twins, Catelyn's skin prickled the way it had once when she was a girl, and a summer storm's lightning would turn the world briefly to milk and silver. A woman learns to trust the itch between her shoulder blades. She watched the fry towers grow and shape the day like a lid on a pot. She watched the men in their gray cloaks, their pale faces as if the river had washed them until only the whites remained. She watched Lord Walder's mouth, thin as a line drawn with a tight string. They were received with polite clamor and a cold generosity that was almost careful enough to be convincing. Catelyn felt each nicety as a hand on the small of her back, pushing her into a room with no windows. The hall was long as a river itself, beams running along like ribs, and tapestries that had sucked up decades of smoke. There were songs. There were pies. Men set aside old hurt as if they were old boots and stomped new rhythms into the floor. Edmure strung himself taut with his bride and tried to keep his eyes from skittering up to his white-haired jailer host. Robb spoke his apology. He did it well. His voice carried. Not a tremor when he called Lord Walder father. And at the end he said, low but as if speaking to the room and his mother's bones at once, "We are wolves, and wolves cannot live for a single hunger." Catelyn thought it a good line. She looked at the candles and wondered why they sputtered as if a draft crawled that she could not feel. In the late hours, the musicians shifted their tune. They played lighter at first, a song men could dance to with one arm around a flagon and another around a cousin. Then the music changed. It sank, as if the strings were dragging weight through mud, a melody Catelyn had heard on the marches. One men sang when they thought victory had already been baked into their bread. A fry boy dropped a plate and no one stooped to pick it up. She looked to Robb. A shadow moved at the edge of her vision. The draft she had felt was in her blood now. She laid a hand upon her son's sleeve. "We should go," she whispered. "There is the bedding," he began, smiles at his lips for public's sake, and then the doors shut like a mouth. Crossbows clicked. You could hear the music's last plucked note as it quivered into nothing. She had always thought that when death came there would be a silence first, a moment where the world drew breath and held it. But there was no such courtesy. Death arrived like wine glugging from a skin, loud and inevitable. She pulled Rob down as the first bolt hissed. It took a man to their right through the throat. On the dais, Edmure had stood, his bride's hands in his. Stunned fish lifted from the river. Catelyn knew the Freys were cowards, that was an old comfort, and so she knew they would shoot those they feared first. She pressed her body between the next bolt and her son and saw him flinch. It struck the table. A moment later the room was knives, men wailing, the crunch of benches pushed over, the music hiding now like mice. Brienne was not there to guard this hall. She had begged to remain with the Tully men by the camp, her sense of duty splitting only toward Catelyn's wishes and Catelyn's orders, which were to protect the camp against a treachery she had half expected but not in this shape. Later, men would tell stories of how the tall maid had cut her way into the hall and pulled men from under tables, of how she had overturned a serving vat and taken bolts in the boards, of how she had hammered a fry with his own gong. Those were stories. In truth, Brienne was at the little postern near the cook's yard, hearing the first screams, and by the time she reached the passageway the floor heaved with blood and men fell like sacks around her. And she fought her way to the dais only long enough to see a wolf standard fall and a boy in a gray cloak with a bolt jutting from his belly like a foreign tree. She took a blow from behind, a pewter bowl or a candlestick. Later she would tell that the weight had been that of her own doubt, and went to one knee. She rose because that is what she did. She rose until a wall of Frey men moved forward, shields like a door, and pressed her outside into rain that seemed to have begun just then for sake of decency. Catelyn held her son as if he were a part of her body seeking to return. She felt the shaft in his shoulder, another along his calf. She could see Lord Walder smile, his thin smile in the doorway of his own safety. She could see Roose Bolton's step like frost out of shadow, his eyes drained of all color as if some river had left him out in sun to bleach. "The Lannisters send their regards," he said, and the words made a cold she had never known pass down her spine and into her teeth. The blade hissed where it found her boy's heart. She thought of how Bran had laughed climbing, and Rickon's finger peeking, and of every stitch she had sewn in her life, and of the river changing its mind and running up a wall for a strange, sudden instant the way fish sometimes do when the light confuses them. When they cut her throat she tried to sing a lullaby she had not sung since her last child had fever, and the song bubbled and made no notes. She fell into a red that was all the reds at once. Riverrun did not hear it that night. The rain was heavy and the blackfish kept the men alert, and the Freys sent no message that would arrive until morning. Jaime dreamt that water ran the wrong way, up instead of down, and that he traced the course with his finger and ended with a wet hand and an empty mind. When the dawn turned late and gray and the first ragged banners came back across the fields, the screaming reached Riverrun's walls more surely than news that had been written with ink. The gates were shut and the watch doubled. The blackfish stood upon the tower and watched fires blacken the sky in the direction of the twins. A line of men came stumbling, all ash and cuts. Many did not come at all. Brienne waded the shallow by the braziers with her hair clotted and her jaw bruised purple. She climbed the outer stair with a steadiness that was purely stubborn. "Lady Catelyn," she said, not loudly, not yet believing. No one answered. Edmure was not found. Later they would learn he had been pulled from the hall and kept breathing as a coin held between two fingers, not to be spun yet, because Lord Walder had sniffed profit. Men who had once drunk from the same wineskin had fled different directions and were set upon by Frey men who had been their cousins in arms a day before. Wolves not yet dead slunk toward the trees. And in their cell in darkness Jaime Lannister paused in his speech to no one and listened, and thought, for the first time since his chains were closed, that perhaps he would die in a place that had never heard a pleasant word about him, and no one would look at his body and think of the boy who had learned to hold a sword like a swan holds the river. The siege that wrapped itself around Riverrun afterward was slow and inevitable as winter. The Freys came first, shoving their siege towers together like children with blocks, boasting and bullying, staking pavilions. In the meadows just beyond bowshot. Then the Lannister standards rose at their backs, a blaze of red and gold, and more disciplined lines appeared, companies under Forley Prester, a proud ring of knights from the west, men who had hammered the Riverlands to splinters before and were keen to make splinters match. Later came others, banners Catelyn would have known but could not now name with a tongue cold and stilled. Tarly's huntsman sigils, perhaps, and peaks, a scatter of reachmen who had marched north in Lord Mace's shadow but took orders now from letters bearing Lord Tywin's neat hand. The Blackfish kept his men tight as a fist. He sent sorties by night to burn engines. He set rafts in the current and cut nets downstream where the enemy might have laid traps to catch them. He rationed onions and wine. He sent men to pray in the sept and told them their prayers would not make more grain grow but could steady hands upon bowstrings. He walked the wall and listened to the river, which told him nothing in words but sometimes dulled the ache behind his eyes. They tried to bargain, as men always do when war turns into counting. Emmon Fry, their new-made lord of Riverrun in title if not stone, came in rustling silk to the east bank and shouted with all the dignity of a man who knows he is ridiculous. "You must yield," he called to the Blackfish. "For my lord father commands it, and the king commands it, and the seven themselves will frown upon this stubbornness." "My lord nephew," Blackfish called back, "when you learn to keep your breeches tied, I may follow your example. Until then, go chase rats from your cellars and leave me to my wall." Emmon went away sputtering. The men laughed. Such laughter was dear. The Blackfish banked it like coin. Inside, the Lannister prisoner remained as precious as ever and twice as heavy. He had no friend among the men, and yet he collected confidences the way a riverbank collects driftwood. Not because it wants to, but because that is how water erodes. The maester would come, and Jaime would ask him about his chain and the time he had thought to be a few links shy of a proper scholar. A boy from Housepiper would come, red in the face with fury at Fry treachery, and Jaime would tell him of battles won by men who had marched drunk and in the wrong direction. It was not kindness what he performed. It was habit. A man shaped into a sword cannot help but be balanced to fit hands, his own or others. Sometimes at night he would touch the piece of blue cloth at his wrist, ragged as it was, and remember the tall girl standing in a bed of muck calling him by his name as if it were truth. Brienne stayed. In the wake of the hall's slaughter she had woken in a ditch by the cook's yard with blood in her ear and a taste of tin. She had run back into a storm and found the course of the murder turned downstream. When she told the Blackfish she would take the first watch by the Lannister cell, he nodded and said, "Good. He should not die by the hand of a Fry. If he dies ours." She thought it a strange blessing but took it as guard's liturgy. Some nights she spoke to the Kingslayer. "My lady," he would say to her, because he knew that to call her sire was to offer her something she wanted and to call her lady was to unbalance her, and he was a man who would always choose to unbalance. But over time the word gentled. On a late night when the moon leaned an elbow on the sill like a tired soldier, he told her a story. How as a boy he had watched his father with a knife and a small strip of leather, honing, the blade always sharp, his father's face always still. "Does steel ever tire?" he asked. "I've never seen it yawn. My lord father does not either." "Men tire," she said. "That is why you make oaths. They hold you up when you grow weak. And when the oath is to a madman, you can keep part of it," she said cautiously, "and discard the rest? Or you can die for it," Brienne said. "Some men do. It may not be meant for all." He looked at her for a long time and then laughed softly. "You are not like anyone." "Nor are you," she said. "Everyone is like someone," he said. "But thank you." He looked down at his hands. "Do you know what I do with a sword now? I cut this chain and walk out and then come back. I'd have to. It's what they'd expect me to do. I sometimes think of doing other things just to have the pleasure of surprise." He looked up. "When the Red Kings fell on your hall." "Don't," she said quickly. "Very well," he said, closing his mouth on the words as if they were edible. "Will your Blackfish yield? When a river freezes, is it still a river? You can walk on it. It will bear you, but it is not itself." "He will not be frozen by men like those," she said. He could live in a crack of ice and laugh. Men laugh when they know they are beaten, he said. What of your lady? What would she do in a crack of ice? Brienne did not answer for a time. She thought of Catelyn's hands knotting her hair into a simple braid, a gesture so ordinary it had made Brienne want to cry. She thought of how the world had tipped and spilled her, and of how she had caught at the nearest thing, a vow like a rope. She went to the God's Wood alone and spoke to trees without faces. Later, she found a band of men in hoods riding in silent lines through the scrub near the Red Fork. Some she knew by their work, some by their gait, some by rumor. The Brotherhood without banners had grown leaner and scarred in the months since last spring, and the man at their center wore his hood closer than the rest. Rumors ran up and down the riverlands that they were ghosts with breath, that they hung frays like fruit and left them for crows to peck at until the bones showed white like harvest. If they were ghosts, Brienne found their horses ordinary enough and their blades maintained with ordinary care. When they pulled back a hood and she saw the face beneath her BR. Eth stopped. The eyes were wrong, too washed, too milked, but she knew the shape of the cheekbones and the line of the mouth, even when drawn and gray. Lady Catelyn's throat. He looked up at the walls of Riverrun and stroked his beard as a farmer might stroke a fence post and say, well, that will be mended. He sent vine men to cut every supply the Blackfish might have to his name. He sent letter after letter to the Blackfish, elegantly phrased, urging him to yield for the good of the realm, for the mercy of the small folk, for the sake of a boy child not yet born to Edmure Tully and his new Fry wife. The letters were well made, the lies inside them chosen with a hunter's care. Then he had Edmure march to the front of the fortress with a noose around his neck. It was not a gesture born of Fry cruelty. It was calculation. Tarly kept his face smooth with that sort of weathered humanity a seasoned soldier wears to protect himself from the mirror. Edmure looked out over the moat with a dignity that did not suit him well but fit him enough for the purpose. He shouted lovely things about his wife's belly, about children yet to swim in rivers not filled with blood. He pleaded with his uncle by name. His voice broke in the right places. Brienne stood upon the wall beside the Blackfish and watched the old man's jaw work, and wondered if it would crack. Even if I yielded, Blackfish said quiet, they would take the castle and break the men and send me to some nameless fort to die by inches. But they will spare the small folk. They always do. Just don't walk near their soldiers while they spare you. His eyes never left Edmure's. He is boy and fool and mine. I will not watch him die under a Fry noose for want of pride. I am not that sort of man. A different sort, perhaps. That night he called his captains into the Solar, and when Brienne began to withdraw, he told her to stay. You carry a sword. Let it carry a brain as well, he said, which in him was almost a compliment. He put stones upon the map and pushed them as far as he could without using his hands, as if the forces were made of air and will alone. We will send Edmure out with terms, he said. I will escort him to the gate with men I would weep for. He will ask for grace. If they offer it, he will take it. If they do not, we will keep him here and he will be a ruin inside of a week. No man must trust Freys. But there is Lord Tarly at their back and he is not a Fry. You will have to parley, Brienne said. He said, and I will not step more than 1 foot past the gate. What of the Lannister? Asked one of the captains, a Riverlands man with eyes like the underside of leaves. Can we not place him upon the wall and stop their breath with the sight of him? We will not lower ourselves to that, the Blackfish said. He is coin, but coin corrodes if dipped in every cup. Keep him salted below and let him do no harm. Brienne took that with her when she went below to tell the prisoner he would not be traded in the morning like a sack of barley. He listened, an amused curve to his mouth. If you had your choice, he said, would you throw me from the highest window or open my chains and bid me flee? I would not throw anyone, Brienne said. And if I opened you are chains, you would not flee. You draw a sword. You cannot be other than you are. He looked pleased by that. Watch, he said softly. If their lord is Tarly, he will not storm. He has too much taste to waste men. He will find the place to press instead. Do not teach me siegecraft, Brienne said. but she stored the words away. He had learned war at a lord's knee. She had learned it by falling and rising until the bruises taught their lesson. The parley came. The gates opened as much as a mouth might open for a single careful bite. The Blackfish stood before the bridge with Edmure at his side, and the river behind him, and men with bows high above upon the battlements. Across the way, Lord Tarly looked as he always did, as if the weather were a small nuisance he had been assured would soon be over. Emmon Fry bobbed at his side, clucking. The words were parched. Yield, mercy, oath, realm. The Blackfish asked after his niece by marriage. Edmure said her name, and his voice caught on it. The noose had left a mark like a finger on his throat. Tarly heard everything that was not said and flicked his attention to where it was needed. He found it inside the walls, not without. He did not storm. He pressed. By week's end, the food had notes in it that no one liked. Men began to cough with a certain rhythm. The river carried men's waste downstream, and somehow it did not carry it far enough. And a sickness came that was not war's but was its messenger. The Brotherhood without banners struck the phrase again and again, cutting down foragers, burning a half-built tower, driving off an ox team that had come with timber from the west. They kept the phrase too wary to be useful and made Tarly curse softly in his tent, where only his squire could hear. But a siege is patience and pressure, and the Reach Lord had more of both than Riverrun had stores. One night, when thunder took up a conversation with itself beyond the horizon, Brienne climbed to the parapet and leaned upon the stone and watched the dark. She thought of her vow, the clean rope, the lady's eyes like embanked coals. She thought of Jaime below, pacing as much as his chain permitted, talking to keep himself a man and not a voice. She thought of Sansa and Arya as she did an hour every day, because to not think of them would be to unmake herself. When a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness at her side, she started and went to half-sword. A man with a half-helm blocked the moon and said in a voice he must have practiced to be so bland, "You used to be taller. Do I know you?" she asked. "You don't," he said. "But you know who sent me." He lifted his chin toward the woods. "She tells you to be ready. They will try the water gate when the rain comes proper. With nets. The river level is wrong, but they will press that place. Rivers don't forgive such pressing." "How?" Brienne asked. "How does she know?" "Because men have minds and women have eyes," he said, as if that arithmetic were sufficient. "She asks me to say your oath is due. You tell her I will not break this castle for her," Brienne said. "I swore, but I swore to live in the world after. If I break this stone, there will be no world for these men." "She doesn't ask you to open a gate," he said, "only to watch where it opens itself." He melted backward into the dark in a way that said he was not a specter, merely practiced. Brienne went down. She did not sleep. The rain came louder, and the river goose-fleshed itself in delight. Men shouted along the eastern runs in the hour before dawn, that hour when men's hearts are most traitors. Brienne ran to the water gate and saw the nets exactly where her visitor had said, saw them tugged even though the river would have pulled them away. The Blackfish was there in a breath, his hair plastered, his eyes very alive. "Pull the casks," he said. "Push the rocks. We do not let them catch us." They did not. But in the confusion and the spray, a group of Lannister men found the foot of the wall along an angle no one had thought a man might try. They came with hooks and with ladders that had been measured for this angle. They came quiet because Tarly commanded, and no man under him shouted for the sake of glory. They did not get far. It was a poor place to climb, but they got far enough to make men run, far enough to make someone leave a post he ought not to have left, far enough as these things go to set a pin misaligned. When the rain eased and the men counted their dead and their arrows and the ladders broken or thrown back to drift toward seaward markets, the lines around the castle were a finger's width closer than before. The next day Lord Tarly had Edmure brought forward again. "You are wanted," he called, as if it were a pleasant invitation. "You are wanted in your wife's bed. If you would sleep at last without a knot around your neck, bid them yield." Edmure did. He spoke and spoke. The Blackfish listened and listened. At the end he said, "We will parley once more. Bring more words. Bring better ones." Before that parley could be arranged, Men on the western parapet saw movement near the fish pond by the godswood. Men below pushing against men above, shoulders held at the wrong angle for mere struggle. A door that had not been used in years gave a sigh. It was only an inch. No one would have seen it but for a boy who had been a poacher once and knew the language of leaves when they were pushed from behind. But the inch widened a finger's breadth. "They're inside." The boy gasped as he ran. Panic is an animal that has no more language than hunger. The blackfish ran toward the water gate. Brienne went with him because that is what she did. The Lannister men did not flood in. Tarly would have skewered them as foolish if they had, but they slid in, precise, one after another, the way a sewing needle slips through a tight seam. In the press and the wet, a dozen treacheries budded like flowers and a dozen loyalties died quietly because their holders were too busy to honor them properly. Brienne cut a man near the back of his knee and he cried out more out of surprise than pain. The river rose over her boots. "Fall back through the inner yard," the blackfish ordered. "We will bleed them there." They did. Oh, they bled them. But the castle bled also, and all blood goes somewhere eventually. By dusk a white flag appeared on the far bank. Tarly, never one to waste a victory on spectacle, did not blow trumpets. He sent a single man with a parchment, and the blackfish read it and looked very tired. He gave orders that sounded like surrender without ever using the word. He told men to break off engagements and step back, ignoring the itch in their shoulders that came of leaving a fight too quickly. He told Brienne to stay with the prisoner. "Sir," she said, because the day had shaved her words down to their handle. "If they enter, if they reach this door, you will not be noble," he said. "You will do what a soldier does. You will keep what coin you can out of their hands until it is safe to spend it." "My vow," she said. "You keep it," he said. "You keep it so well it hurts. But you will not spend us all for the price of a promise made to a ghost." When the Lannister men came for Jaime, it was not with horns or with shouts, but with 2 men in plain mail and a sergeant who had known the castle's halls before the war. Brienne stood with her sword drawn and her mouth very dry. "I have sworn him safe here," she said. "You have sworn him safe?" the sergeant asked. His brow lifted as if at a fair trick. What an odd room to make such vows in. "Out of the way, girl." She did not move. "Where will you take him?" "To his men," the sergeant said. "They have missed him terribly." Jaime watched between them, manacles bright with water. "Brienne," he said, so quietly she had to lean to catch it over the distant clamor. "If you ever meant to save me, now would be the time." "If I save you," she said, "it will be from yourself." He smiled. Then it turned into something else, something like weariness. "I will not die today," he said. "That would annoy too many people." He inclined his head to the sergeant. "Shall we, good sirs? I should like to breathe other air." "You will not be harmed if you go peaceably," the sergeant said to Brienne, and that was the only kindness he offered. She stood aside, because to fight here would be to kill 2 men she did not hate and to die for nothing, and to ensure that the next soldier through would be less inclined to courtesy. She watched them unclamp the chains. They had the key. They knew exactly how many links. They knew the little twist in the iron one had to make because some smith had been too tired on the day he made the lock. She watched them lift Jaime as if he were not her charge but theirs, which he now was. He did not look back. Or if he did, she saw him do it only in imagination, a trick of light on water that makes the river seem to move backward. The men who had guarded him in the depths of Riverrun turned and went to other doors. Brienne touched the damp stone, and then her shoulder where the bruise from the wedding still had a long purple tail, and thought, "Vows are rivers, they go on after you have stepped away. They run under the earth for miles and come up in places no one expects." They took Jaime first to Tarly. The lord from the Reach looked him over with a cool eye that assessed him as if he were a hunting bow someone had pawed at. He nodded once in approval that the string had not been cut. "Sir Jaime," he said, "it is a relief to return you to the realm." "To someone's realm," Jaime said. He flexed his wrists. The iron's bite would be there tomorrow in a neat line of purple. "I thought I might someday see the sky from a less square angle." "We will ride you to our lines and send you on to Lord Tywin," Tarly said. "He has use for you. Try to use yourself for his purposes for once. You may find it a sharper exercise than your usual sport." "What do you know of my usual sport?" Jaime asked lightly, but the Lord did not rise to the bait. It was not surprising. Tarly seemed to keep his appetites in a jar on a shelf and bring them down only to feed on a proper day. They rode him across the field to a tent where the gold and crimson hung heavy and men wore their hair trimmed in the way of the West. Forley Prester stood with a hand on his hip, pleased as a cat who had got cream and then discovered there was fish below it. "Look at you," he said. "The king's own sword. A little rusted but still the right length." "If my length pleases you, I shall tell my cronies," Jaime said, because the habit of that sort of jest was as old as his first fencing lesson and had gotten him through more rooms than skill alone. "Has the world turned much while I've been underground?" "It has," Prester said smugly. "Joffrey is dead, poison. Tyrion killed him. The imp was tried and judged and cut down for it. Lord Tywin sits the realm in truth and the Tyrells in half-truth. Your sister is his daughter as she ever was. The Stark boy is a ghost used to keep northern hearths from going out. His mother," he shrugged, "dead twice if you like stories. The Night's Watch crows have been stirred, and Stannis Baratheon plays at war upon the snow." Jaime's face did not move for a time. Then he made a shape with it that could be mistaken for a smile if the light were poor. "Tyrion is dead." He said it as if tasting it and not trusting his tongue. "And father lives to fuss about the angle of the forks in the Tower of the Hand." "Father lives to count," Prester said. "He has counted you absent long enough. Then let us not keep him from his sums." Jaime breathed and felt air on his teeth as if he had not in months. He looked back once, he thought, toward the stones of Riverrun, which now were written in the sky like the lower jaw of some giant. He thought of the tall girl, of the Blackfish, of a woman with a throat cut twice and a voice cut entirely, and of how chains could be comfortable when the world beyond was a mess of tangle. Lord Tywin received his son in a room that made men feel careful even when they were alone. He had papers, always papers, neat stacks of them, and a quill that moved with a precision you could call mercy if you liked words to do more work than they were paid for. He lifted his head as Jaime entered and did not at first stand. He did not have to. He had perfected the art of making men feel he had stood, and that they had not noticed. "You took your time," he said, after the formalities had measured themselves out. "But perhaps you have learned patience." "I learned that stones sweat in summer and freeze in winter," Jaime said, "and that men talk more when you give them nothing else to do." "You should have had more interesting friends," Tywin said drily. "No matter. You are back. You will go to the Riverlands again and finish what men without training or spine could not. You will take Riverrun, properly this time, and set Emmon and his simpering wife in it and command them not to let it rot. Then you will ride north and make the Boltons remember their place. If Stannis burns his own sailcloth for warmth, no concern of ours. He can freeze where he likes. We rule the sunlit half. See that it stays lit. I will send you a proper company, men who take orders and do not gossip. Do you want for anything?" Jaime looked around for a sword and saw a dozen. He did not pick one. "I want a bath," he said. "After that, I will want a horse." "You will take the white cloak when you arrive in the capital again," Tywin said. "Wear it for council. Remind the petty lords whose arms are embroidered upon it. Remember that you are not merely a sword, though God knows you'll try." "What else am I?" Jaime asked, curious, as if he were a man at a market stall asking about an unfamiliar implement. "Mine," Tywin said, so lightly it hardly made a mark in the air. Jaime bowed because it cost nothing and bought something. He took his baths and he slept. He dreamed of a river running uphill and of a woman with hair like the red fork and a throat that could not sing. He dreamed of a tall girl untying a knot with her teeth because her hands were busy holding back two enemies at once. He woke with the taste of metal and went to hunt for something he had never before needed to hunt for. The shape of the thing he might be when no one else was telling him his measure. Far north and east, in places where the red of the Riverlands leached into brown and then into white, men burned for warmth. Lord Roose held Winterfell for a while with the same lack of expression he gave his meat, and his bastard smiled as if the world had a private joke just for him. Stannis cut his cloth thinner than was wise and prayed to a fire that asked as much of men as any cold does. None of that is this story, not exactly, and yet it breathes nearby, sharing walls with it the way a keep's rooms share stones. In the Vale, a girl with auburn hair learned how to slice fruit and lie gracefully while men fought in tournaments named for someone else. She dreamed sometimes of a tall, plain woman who had promised protection and then vanished into fog. In King's Landing, the Queen Mother watched her father and son with a woman's endless inventory, hating everything she had not thought of first. She did not remember her twin as a boy when she looked at him now. She remembered him as a sword. She loved him too much to be bored by him and too little to ask who he was. Brienne did not leave the Riverlands. When they took Jaime, she had thought for a moment to throw herself upon the sergeant and the second man and slice with a clean arc and accept the punishment that came next. She had even stepped forward and felt her knee begin to bend. Then she remembered the lady's eyes in the hood and the vow that was now two vows, and she held herself back so hard it hurt. After Riverrun changed hands again and Emmon Fry was put inside it with a face like a boy found playing at Lord in his father's chair, Brienne went to the woods. The Brotherhood found her before she found them. They took her without fuss and hung her without ceremony until her face turned a color no one had named for because they did not want to name it. Then they cut her down because Lem had a strange tenderness for stupid courage and because the lady lifted a pale finger. They took her before the throne that was not a throne, just a stump with roots, and the lady looked at her for a long time from those lake-dead eyes. "I could not bring him," Brienne said. "Would you have me break stone with my hands? Would you have me hang with him between us? If you had given me time, I might have cut the chain and dragged him myself. And when you had him, what then? Would you have pulled him apart slowly until he named every fry he knew? You would not have liked the names that came. They would be ours as well, some of them men once called friends. I would be dead now. I would be no good to your daughters. I cannot be everything to everyone's vengeance." The lady made a noise then. A rasp like an old door moved for the first time in years. It might have been a laugh once. It was not now. Lem said what she could not. "Then bring us another. Bring us a fry. Bring us a dozen." "I will bring you what I find," Brienne said. "But I will bring you girls if I can. And if I cannot, I will not come back. And you may take this poor neck of mine and make the rope sing." They let her go. They did it because somewhere inside that notch where Lady Catelyn had once kept her better angels there was the vague itch of a mother's patience. Because Lem had decided he did not dislike the tall fool. Because the rain made the rope heavy. Because wars are long. Because men tire of the wrong things and maintain the wrong things. Brienne went with an empty belly and a sword she kept oiled out of habit. She went to the fords and to the inns and to the stone circles where men played at kings in secret and led no one anywhere. She asked about a girl with hair like winter wheat and a wolf's face, and about another who might no longer know her own name. She chased rumors that broke underfoot. She caught, once or twice, a thread she thought would lead somewhere, and followed it until it went to ground and then dug. One night, near a place where the burned timbers of an inn stuck up like black rib bones, she found a lad no older than she had been when she first learned that beauty was nothing she needed to carry. He was half-starved and had one shoe. He said he had seen a girl who once wore a cloak with leaves on it, and that she had left with a man whose nose bent left, and that they had gone toward the hills. Brienne went toward the hills. She found nothing but her own footprints when she circled back days later. She put her hand upon the stump of a tree that had been felled to feed a camp's fire and thought, not for the first time, that vows sometimes had to eat wood. In King's Landing, the lion roared quietly. Tywin sat, and the coin poured from the counting houses. They married Tommen to the Rose Girl as planned, without his sister to invent new ungoverned pleasures. The boy became docile and soft-eyed. The Tyrells sent ships where gold asked them to send them. A Septon polished his crystal and told himself the realm had come through a fire without smoke. Nothing is ever so clean, but men with soft beds can be convinced. Cersei smiled in rooms where she had once snarled. Frightened men more. Jaime took command of a company and rode west and riverward and north and back, and when he came to a crossing by the Red Fork, he looked down at the water and saw a glint. He thought for a moment he saw a motley skirt just below the surface. He spurred forward and let the horse drink. It was only a drowned pot helmet. He laughed to himself and then stopped, because something about the sound discomfited him. If he had ever told Brienne the truth of the boy he had pushed, he might not have found a better thing to be with that confession. He might simply have relieved himself of a weight that had grown to fit him. But he had told her only half, and she had accepted it as if it were a coin that bought bread for a day or two and did not worry about the future. He rode through the riverlands and saw the places where the phrase had hung men, and he cut down too, and he told himself it was because no one deserved to dangle like that and be left for crows. The men who rode with him, carefully selected for their quiet, did not comment when he vomited into the ditch after the second one. He returned to King's Landing when the year turned again. He walked the halls and put his hand upon the stone where once a man had crept after midnight to commit a deed that would have unmade the realm if the realm had been less flexible. He went to Cersei and she held his face in her hands and told him she needed him, and he said nothing, and then he said nothing again. He went to the White Sword Tower and ran his hand along the rack and chose a blade that felt like his but had not known his skin before. He practiced with it in the morning and in the evening until the sweat made a map of his body. He did not become a different man through exertion. Men become different by reaching into themselves and pulling out something new and living with it. Jaime had never liked to reach. He had always had others to do it for him. Lady Stoneheart continued to hang men. Sometimes she hung the right ones. Sometimes she did not, because the world did not make a habit of collecting its debts in strict order. She would sit upon her stump of a throne, if you can call it a throne, and let Lem talk, and once in a while she would twitch when a name landed in the air like a fly. Brienne did not bring her Jaime. She brought her Forfrays. She watched them die. It did not steady her sleep much. She dreamed of Sansa and of Arya and of how a rope looks after it has done hard work. She dreamed of a river that whispered, "You cannot use us up. We go on." Riverrun sat under its new lord like a cat wearing a child's ribbon. Emmon Fry strutted and fussed over tapestries and had to be reminded not to let the river gate fall into disrepair. The Blackfish was never found. He had jumped into the water in one story and into the future in another. Men at fords would say they had seen him on a gray mare, and a boy in a village would swear he had seen the old knight lay a trout upon a doorstep and then vanish into mist, and a woman at a weir would whisper that she had felt a current go past her legs that was not the river's, and that it had laughed a little as it went. Jaime, when told these stories, would say nothing and then say, "Water chooses," as if he had thought of it. The seasons did not change as men wished them to. There were summers where apples rotted on the tree before they were sweet, and winters where men dug into snow until they hit their own basements and found wine too frozen to pour. In a year when cold made men put their bodies closer in bed than their pride liked, a rumor came to King's Landing that the sea had moved, that ice had dreamed itself further south. Old men remembered fires from their father's time. Tywin had men count logs and count ships and count the number of men who could draw a bow with fingers gone stiff. He wrote letters to Lord Tarley and to Lord Bolton and to his banners west. Jaime took his orders and rode. He would have ridden his whole life if there had been roads enough and the horses had not eventually died under him. Once, during a pause under a hedgerow, as his men chewed tough bread, a girl passed with a basket of herbs and a look like the edge of a blade turned sideways. Her hair had been cut short as a hedge in spring, and her boots were too large. Old brown leather flapped around her calves. She had a scar along her forearm that did not quite have the right story with it. Jaime looked, and she looked back, and in that moment he had the sense of something missed with true finality, not like a shift in a battle that can be corrected with a new order, but like a child who turns left when his nurse tells him to turn right and so falls down a well no one had remembered to cover. Then she was gone down the path, and his men were laughing at a jest someone had made about a goat, and he could not summon the shape of the thought again, only the taste. There are tales that go on after the page ends and some that end before they ought to because men are tired and somebody has to pin down numbers. This tale goes on the way a river goes on when you stand upon a bridge and say, "It is the same river as yesterday, and then correct yourself, remembering the lesson you were once given by a clever boy. Catelyn Stark never freed Jaime Lannister. The result was not that walls were stronger or men more honorable or winters shorter. It was only this. A chain that might have been cut by a mother's hand was instead opened by a lord's command. A man who could have learned to be different by walking beside a woman who saw him truly, learned instead to be older in the same shape. A realm that might have toppled under a son's bolt held together under a father's quill a little longer than anyone liked. But it is a long land. Brienne of Tarth kept walking upon it like a stubborn pilgrim, and sometimes men who had done shames could not name would wake from a dream of a tall girl untying a knot with her teeth and feel a little better, though they were no better men for feeling it. Jaime would sometimes take off the glove of his sword hand and look at his palm and half expect to find a line cut across it that he had not made, a memory of a chain. He did not. He closed his fist and opened it, closed it and opened. Somewhere north a woman with a seam for a voice watched for a daughter who would not come, and a justice that could not correct itself into mercy. The river rang on stone. When it swelled enough it poured over the banks and the fields drank and drank. And in dry years the earth cracked and asked for water by opening its mouth. Men put walls along it and bridges over it and mills in it. It went on anyway.